we're back at the AM&AA Winter Conference here in St. Petersburg, Florida. This is M&A Access, and I'm your host, Jordan Wendelken. I am joined by Graeme Frazier, who is with Private Capital Research and GF Data, and we've been talking about data. We've been talking about GF Data specifically and how that has played a role in AM&AA, and we're really happy to have you. You've been a sponsor as well of our conferences, and how are you enjoying the show so far? We've just started.
Just kicking it off right now. So far, so good. Place looks great, and happy to be here.
Yeah, it's always nice to step out. You know, being from Dallas, our weather's not great right now, so it's always nice to come here and enjoy a little fun in the sun. M&A industry, your experience, we've been talking a little bit about it from the investment side. Tell me a little bit more about your company.
Well, so I started Private Capital Research back in 2001, 2002 after spending around 5 years working for a pretty well-established family office in Philadelphia. And Private Capital Research has a somewhat unique business model, which we haven't strayed from for the past 20 years. We work with a small number of private equity sponsors and family offices to source and originate transactions that are lower middle market buyout deals. We work on the buy side, and we co-invest in the deals we do with our clients. So over time, we've amassed a portfolio of co-investments, and we continue with the 4 employees at Private Capital Research to do our work of sourcing and origination with our clients, who we view as our partners in that regard.
So you're like the trusted source. You're finding deals essentially and opportunities for those investment firms. How many do you add to that? The investment firms that you work with, or you have stuck with the same group for a long period of time?
It's been a somewhat steady group. There is some turnover. You know, we might have a couple roll off and a couple roll on each year, but we have around a dozen clients, and that's a good steady state number for us.
That's really interesting though, because a lot of people, they think, you know, especially if they're selling a company, they're looking into selling their company. They're like, oh, I'm gonna try to find an investor, but then there's also, you know, someone like you in your company that is that kind of go-between. You're actively searching, or do you find that some reach out to you? Is that what you use AM&A platform for? Tell me a little bit about that.
So AM&A has been a great organization for Private Capital Research and GF Data, mostly due to the relationship base that exists within these organizations. It's really a relationship business, which is wonderful, and that's something that really gets us excited. Our sourcing model at Private Capital Research is somewhat unique. I don't really know any other firms that do this the way we do. We source almost all of our deals from a very long list of boutique investment bankers that represent companies for sale. Okay, nice. And we're totally transparent with them about who our clients are, and we get permission from them to work with our client on any given mandate that they're representing. Therefore, we're working on actionable situations with a willing seller that there's a reasonable likelihood that a deal is going to actually get transacted. So we're not calling up companies directly and cold calling companies to see if they want to sell.
So these investment banks, they've done business with some of these companies. They've over a period of time, and they've come to you and said, hey, you know, we think that this particular firm is positioned well, might meet your kind of criteria, and then you go in and kind of do your audit, or how does that usually work?
We don't really do an audit, and we normally it's a lot of work for us, because the nicer the quality of the target company, the less likely the information is going to be willingly shared by even an investment banker who's been retained to sell a company, or a broker. Business owners tend to govern that information flow, and so to be able to obtain access to see better quality deals, you need to have a relationship with the advisor and get them to open up and tell you about better deals. And that's something that takes a long time to build those relationships and develop that kind of business.
It's a good niche and a good process for obtaining those relationships. So GF Data, as it is its own entity and so on, it's kind of and what it starts to sound like is it's a needed, it's a necessity for, it's kind of by the people for the people in the sense that you still use GF data with your investments and the transactions and so on and so forth. Correct?
Absolutely.
Because it's a necessity of sorts.
I like to think so, yeah. So GF data sources and publishes information on transaction statistics, valuation multiples, debt pricing, capital structure dynamics, key deal terms for lower middle market private equity sponsored deals with 10 to 500 million of enterprise value. And that data is sourced in a proprietary way from, at this point, a cadre of over 360 private equity sponsors. 265 or 70 of them are currently what we call active participants. But so it's not something where you can just go out on the internet and sort of look for that data and aggregate it. This is due to the relationships with the sponsors that have a trust relationship with GF data enough to disclose 25 points of data per transaction on completed deals they've done going back from the beginning of 2003 through the present. There's almost 4,700 deals in the database right now.
That's amazing. And again, a great resource. Almost, utilizing that data certainly makes your decision making more calculated, but at the same time, it sets kind of a guide, right? The channel of sorts for you to kind of utilize that data to work within the industry.
Exactly. I mean, the key to it from our perspective at Private Capital Research, and many of you guys know Joe Morris, and my son recently joined our firm, Graeme Frazier and Ken Walser. The key to both of these companies is the relationships that we have with the investment bankers at GF Data. I think 60 or 65% of the subscriber base are boutique investment bankers, and the data is proprietarily sourced from private equity sponsors who are the buyers, whereas at Private Capital Research, we source most of our deals from a very long list nationally of boutique investment bankers and sell-side advisors and other professionals that are connected to business owners, and our clients are private equity sponsors who do change and control deals in the same space. So the relationship overlap for both businesses is the key to the whole thing. AMA is a wonderful center point for a lot of those relationships to come together.
So tell me a little bit about, let's jump into some experiential scenarios here, in the sense that when you are in the early stages of potentially investing, acquiring, merging, so on and so forth, what would you say is a key strategic point for your client, or let's say the company that's looking for the investment? What would you say is a key factor for them to know leading into something like that? A lot of people are, they might not be as clued in on EBITDA and so on and so forth, and they have these outrageous valuations that they take. GF data obviously helping to be able to kind of level the plane a little bit, but what are some other things that you feel are important for somebody in that early stage who's looking for the investment to potentially sell or whatever they're looking for that investment for? What would you say is something in that early stage that they need to know that will help your job even go smoother?
It's a great question, Jordan. Getting expectations in line early on is really, really important when it comes to doing what we do in terms of buying companies. When the seller has realistic expectations around value and structure and how a deal can get done, there's a much higher likelihood that a deal actually will get done. And you get the factor of many business owners that talk to their buddies in a variety of different industries, maybe other than their own, and they hear stories of high multiples and crazy valuations, and then they think immediately that, well, their company's got to be worth the same amount, right? But different industries and different companies with different characteristics attract a wide variety of multiples. And one of the best things that GF Data has brought to this industry, from my view, is that it allows advisors to help owners understand and set the expectations for the value of their business up front. And sometimes it's not the prettiest news for the owner to learn that companies that look just like theirs with similar growth, similar size, similar margins, similar characteristics such as that, have completed transactions at certain multiples that GF Data has proprietary transaction data on these completed deals. And when the business owner looks at that and says, okay, so these are completed transactions. This is how much leverage was used. This is the cost of the debt. This is how much subordinated debt was used. This is how much equity went into the capital structure. This was the valuation multiple. And these are completed deals, and these were done at 7.3 times EBITDA, 6.6 times EBITDA, 9.7 times EBITDA, maybe 11.5 times EBITDA, depending on the size and the characteristics of the business. But when the owner understands where the market really is and is willing to hire an advisor to help him achieve a goal based on that expectation, then you got a really high likelihood that a transaction is going to occur. And it's so hard to get a deal done in this business. It takes, once you sign a letter of intent, it still takes 60 to 90 days at a minimum to complete a transaction because so much scrutiny is done on these private companies. So it's a miracle that any of these things get done half the time. It's very complicated. So if you don't start off with the proper level of expectations from the seller, you're likely to go down a path that you'll never get to the end game.
Sure, and a lot of that has to do with, again, like what we've kind of been speaking to, which is relationship building. Yep. Having that relationship in place, having that trust in place, and when you've been working with a network of people for many, many years. I mean, you've been in the business for over 20 years. That helps, and developing those relationships certainly. I mean, this is a big deal for somebody, and
it's a high
for
trust
everybody.
business.
Yeah,
high trust business. You have to have the credibility, you have to have the staying power, and you got to engender the kind of trust that allows people to share sensitive information. People that own companies with high margins that are unique niche businesses, which are the kind of companies that we're interested in, they don't want that information spread around unless it's going to be spread around to a person or an entity that maybe it's meaningful to them. They don't need competition. They don't need other people learning about how they do things.
Sure, of course. So what's the landscape looking like for the near future? I've seen the stock markets doing stock market things, up, down, looking positive lately. With that said, with the economy still kind of teetering, what's that look like in your world, in investor world?
So the lower middle market M&A market is not directly correlated to the public stock markets, which I'm sure is pretty clear to everyone who's interested in this side of the market. But over the course of the last year, a 500 basis point increase in interest rates from the Fed is real, and that's a big increase in the cost of capital, and typically there's an inverse relationship there between the cost of capital and valuation multiples because it's got to come from somewhere, and it typically comes out in the valuation multiple. So we've been through quite a ride since the COVID pandemic, and the reality is that right now, we have got a situation where you've got a market that is supported very, very strongly by a tremendous amount of uninvested capital that has been committed to both private equity funds and to private credit funds. And the entire private credit world has cropped up in the past 10, 12 years. So it's not a commercial bank world only anymore. It still is a commercial bank world for many, many lending and structure situations. But there are a variety pack of options in terms of leverage from private and public BDCs to structure deals. And there's been an explosion in limited partner commitment, institutional commitment to private equity funds. You've also seen additional family offices develop over the past 5-10 years. The independent sponsor world has blossomed into a variety of themes there. So that creates a stability for the lower middle market M&A world that is just wonderful, and it makes it a fabulous place to work.
So you had mentioned that GF Data provides all of those analytics from deals and so on and so forth. Expand on that a little bit more.
Well, one thing I should mention in addition to that is that I talked about Andy, and I started in 2006. So 16 years later, we decided that a bigger home might be the right idea for it, and so we made an agreement to sell the business to ACG Global. About a year ago, the deal closed, and so GF Data is now part of the platform of ACG Global. Bob Dunn is the managing director of GF Data, an ACG company now, and Bob has a great history in financial information publishing. Andy and I are still involved. Bob Wegbright is still the executive director of sales, and so I just think it's important to point that out, that it's part of a bigger platform now that I think will allow it to grow even to the next level.
That's fantastic. More opportunities for business owners out there. It looks like a bright future, especially for those that get to work with Graeme Frazier. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks, Jordan.
It's been great hearing about that, and thank you for the involvement and the contributions from GF Data to AM&AA. I know we greatly appreciate it.
Thanks, Jordan.
That's M&A Access. I'm your host, Jordan Wendelken, and we are at AM&AA Winter Conference in St. Petersburg, Florida. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us on M&A Access. If you enjoyed what you just watched, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe for more content just like that.